It is crazy that we thought technology would solve all our problems, isn't it? Because even with spaceships that go between planets, there's still crazy delays. I'm on planet Hertagia right now. The interstellar taxi system is what I've been using to transport between planets, and it's been pretty great. It's super reliable and everything, but there are so many delays happening right now with the taxi system that I'm literally just sitting here in a taxi office waiting for something to happen. Hey y'all, welcome to Oblivion's Library. I'm Haley Straub, your local intergalactic traveler, exploring the galaxy, collecting stories, and I never expected to find one here of all places. In this taxi office, there's a big map on the wall of all the known planets. The planets that are circled in green are habitable. The ones circled in yellow are uninhabitable, but they still carry taxi service there for whatever reason. And some planets on this map are X'd out in red. I asked the station master why the planets on the map were crossed out, and he said that those planets the taxi service does not, under any circumstances, give taxi transport to, either because the planet's atmosphere is too deadly, or there's internal conflicts there, or the planet's inhabitants are too deadly, and stuff like that. When I saw the giant map on the wall of the taxi office, the first thing I did was find my home solar system, because, what's the first thing you do on Google Maps? You find your house. That's just like a human instinct or something. So I found my solar system. I found Earth, circled in green, of course. All the other planets, Mercury through Neptune, all circled in yellow because they're uninhabitable. But our neighbor, planet Mars, was crossed out in red. I asked the station manager, why don't you carry transport to Mars? And he said it's because Mars is inhabited by murderous robots. Yeah, I wasn't expecting that answer. I told the station master, I'm from the neighboring planet of Earth. If anything's happening on Mars, we would know. And he's like, no, the Earthlings don't know about it. Nobody knows what's happening on planet Mars right now. The taxi service only knows about it since someone took a taxi to Mars and then never came back. And that was several years ago, and he called it the Mars incident. So he told me about this Mars incident. I looked into it a little bit more. They haven't sent anyone to Mars since, so I was going off of mostly speculation. But hey, I've got an hour before my taxi is ready, so I might as well tell you guys the stories of the robots on Mars. This story is owned and copyrighted by Haley Straub. This story is not affiliated with Taylor University and may not necessarily reflect the views of the institution. All stories on this podcast are PG and LTC friendly. Trigger warning, however, this story has a character death by asphyxiation of all things, so be aware of that. Today's story is called Martian HAMARTIA. And it starts on the Red Planet with a lowly scrapper robot named NASA. She woke up as the sun was peeking over the rocky horizon. The sky was always blue at sunrise and clouded with thick dust that trapped all the skimpy sunlight. But the sun was just bright enough to reach NASA's solar panels, and she stirred. NASA had shut down for the night, leaning on the Parts Emporium checkout desk. The sunlight wasn't warm, not yet anyway, and dust and frost fell from her joints as she straightened up. The first thing NASA saw was Stepper on the other side of the desk. The robot twitched as the sunlight reached her. 5 more minutes, she groaned, and rolled out of her chair onto the ground. NASA giggled as she stood up. Good morning, Stepper. Where were we? Stepper stood up and glanced at the register. Right, you wanted the steel hammer? That'll cost you a rag. Around them, other Martian robots were rousing. The atmosphere was slowly getting brighter around them. NASA handed Stepper a piece of red fabric from her belt. She picked up her newly purchased steel hammer, playing with it and testing its weight. Night always comes at the worst possible times. Remind me why we make ourselves solar-powered? Stepper used NASA's fabric currency to wipe dust off her solar panels. Because the sun is cheap, but I do wish we had another energy source for when those dust storms blow in. I'm closing up shop now. I'm going up to Olympus today. Spirit and I are beta testing that new reactor prototype we've been making. NASA, what are you making right now? A custom rover, designed for speed. It hit 30 miles an hour yesterday. Once it's done, I'll move on to making a real machine, like a computer, or a forge, or a spaceship. Don't fly that spaceship too high, Stepper recommended. NASA laughed. She often imagined building a real spaceship and using it to fly to the neighboring planet of Earth. She could just imagine the humans' reaction when they saw her, their reaction when they realized the robots they had sent to Mars to pick up rocks could build spaceships. But most importantly, NASA dreamed of the robot's reaction when she actually built a spaceship, or something of similar awesomeness. They would cheer and give her fabric, and it would all be for NASA, who would be the best builder on the Red Planet. Stepper hesitated as she stacked some crates. Which is more impressive, the maker or the thing they make? Well, the maker, NASA answered. I built my rover, and I'll build something epic. Yeah, and I built you, Stepper pointed out. Do I get partial credit? The sun was fully up now, and the sky had faded to its normal dusty red-pink color. The scrapping market was bustling with robots of all makes and models. They appeared slapped together, with barely a skeleton and wires. Some were too poor to buy plating, while others walked around wearing their money. There were four-legged transport robots, shopkeepers with wheels or treads, two-legged scrappers like NASA, and messenger drones with no legs at all. The scrapping market stood on the gentle slopes of Mars' tallest mountain, Olympus Mons. Olympus was the planet's capital, and most of the Martian civilization took place at the city on the volcano's peak. NASA returned to her beloved rover parked on the outskirts of the market. It was solar-powered, like her, and used high-traction treads that she'd forged herself instead of wheels. But the rover's body wasn't staying attached to the treads very well, so NASA put her newly bought hammer to good use. NASA had been built ingrained with a desire to build, and to make something of herself. That was all she wanted. But as NASA worked on her rover, movement caught her eye. Something was burning in the sky. It trailed smoke as it sloped gently downward, landing firmly behind the horizon. Now that was confusing. NASA thought the rocket landing wasn't until later today, and rockets were never that small. Regardless, something had fallen from the clouds, and that potentially meant something to salvage and sell. NASA started up her rover and drove off into the red desert. Her rover glided through the red sand as she veered around the biggest rocks. She often passed other robots collecting rocks for the iron value, but didn't pass anyone heading toward the strange object. Eventually, NASA found the crash crater. In the sand was a rocket's escape pod, clearly designed for a one-way trip. It was steaming and splintering apart, covered with red dust from the impact. But NASA saw lots of salvageable parts and tore off a piece of its white metal plating. Something moved, and NASA dropped the metal in surprise. Cautiously, she backed away as something climbed out of the hole she'd made. It was another two-legged robot, completely covered in white plating. But while NASA's white plating had been salvaged from a rocket at some point, this robot was not made of the same material. Its face was mostly hidden by a glass dome. Then NASA saw the body proportions and the way its eyes blinked, the way it stretched when it stood up. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. It had to be a human. Being built on Mars, NASA had never seen a real human, but she'd heard the stories. Humans could move more fluently, think clearer, and be social better than robots. In fact, it was humans that made the founders and sent them to Mars in the first place. But in the stories, humans made robots and enslaved them, programming them to do their bidding and constantly answer their questions. "You're not a robot, you're a human, an intact, living male human on Mars," NASA exclaimed. "How on earth did you get from Earth to Mars? Rockets never have humans in them. You don't belong here. Wait, can you hear me?" The human nodded. NASA was nervous, but this human didn't seem tyrannical. Actually, he looked amazed and curious. He talked as he studied NASA, but she couldn't hear him through his thick helmet. And even though humans had a bad rep, that didn't excuse the fact that all robots owed their existence to them, and NASA had to respect this human by default. NASA felt funny. So much was going through her head. She was excited to meet someone new, and in awe of him, and confused as to how the stories were so overdone about such a feeble little thing like this human. She pointed to her chest plate, where the NASA logo was printed in bold red letters. It was left over from the rocket NASA was built from. "Well, my name is NASA, and it's printed on here." "Oh, right, you can't talk." "Well, you can, I just can't hear you." "So what's your name?" NASA grabbed the human and looked all over his suit. She was drawn to a patch on his shoulder, with a rocket on it. She knew what the rockets looked like, and the patch said Johnson Space Center. "Your name is Johnson Space Center?" NASA asked. "Okay, good to meet you, Johnson. Based on the fact that your spacesuit doesn't have solar panels on it, I'm guessing you're not solar-powered like I am. So you must know about other kinds of energy. This could work out. NASA had an idea. Perhaps Johnson could work with the founders and make an alternative energy source. Then the robots of Mars could function at night and without weak, unreliable solar power. She would take Johnson up to Olympus. Besides, Johnson was a human. He was superior to robots. Building and working on Olympus with the founders was where he belonged. NASA got to work tearing off Johnson's escape pod and piling the pieces on her rover. Johnson probably didn't understand why, but he helped her anyway. When more scrappers arrived, NASA decided to leave so her parts wouldn't get stolen. But before Johnson joined her on the rover, he picked something up from the ground and held it out to NASA. It was NASA's most prized possession, a picture, and as she drove over the bumpy landscape back to the scrapping market, she told Johnson about it. There was exactly one Polaroid camera on Mars, discovered while scrapping an old rocket after landing. That camera had taken a single picture, which had been duplicated thousands of times. It was a picture of the 5 founders, the most highly respected of the Martian robots, and they ruled the planet by some unspoken agreement. The oldest and smallest founder was Journey, an old-fashioned rover with treads. While unimpressive now, he had mapped out the entire continent solo and had founded Olympus. Then there were the twins, Spirit and Stepper. They were 2-legged, with a keen sense for engineering and science. Spirit built Olympus, while Stepper built more robots. They built and taught what they built how to build, and were the reason so many semi-intelligent robots existed today. Then there was Terrest, the largest of the founders. Terrest was a robotic centaur, with a normal-looking head and arms on 4 large feet. He was a robotic beast of labor, and could carry multiple times his own weight. The last founder appeared as a drone, but it represented founder Curio. Curio's shining factor was the complexity of his mind. He was a digital AI who had once operated a rocket, and now used his knowledge to run Olympus. As an AI, he didn't have a physical form, so he remotely piloted a drone to act as his eyes and ears. NASA and Johnson hit up the scrapping market and sold the scrap metal from the escape pod. Once the rover was empty, NASA and Johnson headed up the mountain. The slope was very gradual, but the ground was gravelly. Luckily, NASA's rover held together well, and she parked it on the outskirts of town. The robots that lived up here on Olympus were more into building and programming, and there was more complete tech here than at the scrapper markets. The robots looked the same, though, and they hardly batted an eye when NASA strolled through the crowded streets trailed by a live human. Johnson was certainly enjoying himself. Every time there was a view of the surrounding landscape, he stopped to stare at it. He also stared at the robots around them, the shops building rovers, the plants forging steel, and the factories constructing new robots. "You see all this, Johnson?" NASA ushered to the bustling town around them. "All of this stops every time a dust storm blows in. I'm hoping you can help us work around solar power." But she didn't get much further before a drone circled around them. Drones weren't uncommon on Mars, but this one was unique. It wobbled in the air when it saw Johnson. "I don't believe it," the drone said darkly. "How did he get here?" NASA was taken aback. This was founder Curio himself, the smartest and most influential robot on Mars. NASA had seen his drones flying around Olympus before, but had never talked to him directly. "Founder Curio, my name is NASA. This is Johnson. I found him in an escape pod when I was out scrapping. It's amazing. Rockets never have live humans inside them." Curio's drone stared at Johnson, who was ignoring the drone and gazing up at the clouds. "You're mistaken, NASA. Rockets always have humans inside them, but this is the first time a human has come alone. They probably sent him to scout. Johnson, here, is the first man on Mars, and he's going to be the last. He can't live here, NASA. Humans need food and water and oxygen. We don't have those things. Not to mention what humans do to robots on Earth. You've heard the stories. It'd be a lot less messy if we get rid of him now." NASA's gears clanked, and her joints locked. Curio was implying they kill him. From what she'd heard, humans were on another level. Was killing one even possible? NASA didn't want to find out. "I don't mean disrespect, Founder Curio, but I found Johnson when scrapping, so technically I get claim of him. I want to at least see what he can do." Curio's drone turned to her. "That attitude tells me you were built by Stepper, right?" He inched closer in the air. "I built Stepper. So I'll thank you to remember your place, NASA. You wouldn't exist if not for me. The drone flew over to Johnson. Listen to me, astronaut. Then Curio put on a fake, monotone voice. Hello, I am Curio. What may I assist you with today? Johnson's eyes widened, and his jaw dropped. He mouthed something NASA couldn't hear, but he did say Curio's name. This told her Johnson had met Curio before. But for that to be possible, both Curio and Johnson would have to be on Earth, together, more than 30 years ago. Yeah, Curio spat. I was one of those. You don't belong here, and I don't know why you've come to my planet, but you shouldn't have. NASA, take Johnson around Olympus. If you can find one job that he can do better than a robot can, he can stay and do that job. If you can't find a place for him by tonight, we throw him in the volcano. Curio's drone flew away, leaving Johnson petrified. NASA met Johnson's eyes. She had so many questions that Johnson physically couldn't answer. So she focused on what Curio had said. NASA led Johnson to the Founders' Fortress, the largest building where the Founders lived. Most of it belonged to Spirit and Stepper, and they often invited robots to watch them tinker and build in their laboratories. Spirit and Stepper were fascinated by Johnson, and paused their work to look him over. The twin sisters had never seen a human before. NASA explained the situation to them. Curio's going to get rid of him unless we find something he can do better than a robot can. I was thinking he could help find an alternative to our solar energy, like what you two were working on. Spirit inspected Johnson. He could be interesting. Let's run some diagnostics. From the tool shelf, get me 23 big screws, yellow tape, 2 large clamps, and a hammer. Johnson hesitated while Stepper swiftly grabbed all the things. Result, slow at comprehending information, gets overloaded easily. Johnson, stand over here. She plugged in a light bulb to a series of electrical boxes piled in the center of the floor. I'm going to start up our electricity prototype. If something goes wrong, pull this lever. Johnson gripped the lever obediently, and Stepper pressed some buttons. The boxes in the center of the dusty room began to hum. The engine was working, and the light bulb flickered on. But then the engine began to overheat and sputtered angrily. Spirit cowered behind her monitor. Johnson, pull the lever! Johnson desperately pulled on it, but the lever didn't budge. Stepper stepped in, accidentally knocking Johnson to the floor, and pulled the lever down with one hand. The engine went silent. Stepper sighed. Result, slow at taking initiative, weak, slow reaction time, and apparently injures very easily. NASA helped Johnson stand up. Are you okay? Johnson nodded, then touched part of his helmet. Part of the glass had cracked, but Johnson was still breathing. He was humiliated, avoiding NASA's eyes, and quickly stormed out. NASA was nervous. She had always imagined humans were superior at everything, but maybe there were some things they just couldn't do. Spirit approached her. Stepper and I were made for this job. Literally, we were. But Johnson wasn't. He's clearly an astronaut and maybe something else on Earth. I don't know. That spacesuit limits his movement and reaction time too much. I'm sorry, NASA, we can't use him here. Come on, Stepper, please, NASA begged. I thought he could help with the electricity. Maybe if he worked with electricity once, but he looked clueless to me, Stepper sighed. I know my creations well. You're going to want to hide him from Curio, aren't you? NASA shifted her weight. I don't want Johnson to die. Neither do we, but Curio made us. We owe our existence to Curio. We can't just go against him like that. Sorry. NASA left the twins' shop and wandered around the dusty streets of Olympus alone. She peered into every shop, wondering if a human would do good somewhere. Metalsmithing? No, Johnson was too weak to pour melted metal. Welding? No, Johnson's spacesuit was too flammable. Running a shop? No, Johnson couldn't multitask and would get tired. Even if he did work on the energy sources, he would be slower than any robot could reasonably work with. The more NASA walked around, the more hopeless she became. The more she began to worry about Johnson. She didn't know why she didn't want him to die. Maybe it was the fact that a legendary human was real and she wanted to preserve him. Or maybe it was something buried in her coding, some initiative left over from a past life, lingering in the wires. Something told her to follow Johnson, to support him, to keep him alive. But where had Johnson run off to? He was nowhere to be seen. NASA found his unique footsteps in the dirt and followed them. They led her to a different part of the Founder's fortress. This room was a special room, hidden away from the rest of the planet. The only thing in it was a small pedestal, upon which sat Founder Journey. Although Journey was the oldest founder, NASA couldn't believe how small and rusted he was. The tiny rover could hardly move or communicate now, and only sat on this podium day after day, half asleep. In a corner of the room, Johnson was asleep, but the metal he was lying on moved. Johnson was sleeping on the back of Founder Terrest, one of the few robots NASA considered a good friend of hers. Terrest sat up, then found his footing for all 4 of his feet, and gently raised himself up to his full 8-foot height. Johnson didn't wake up as Terrest moved around the room. "You'll never imagine my surprise when a human walked up to me," Terrest smiled. "I thought I was hallucinating. It's been so long. But he kind of recognized me, so I gave him a ride and he just fell asleep. It's warm here next to the steel plant. Humans don't do well in the cold, you know." That was when NASA remembered. Terrest was one of the few robots that had been built on Earth and had actually interacted with humans before. No wonder Johnson had recognized him. Terrest had been built to imitate a centaur. Some of his original blue plating was still intact, although he was covered with red patches and repairs. At one point, he had had a long mane and tail like a horse. The original hair for these had long since snapped off, but Terrest kept the appearance with long red wires instead. NASA stared at Johnson sleeping. He was so vulnerable. She sighed. "Founder Terrest, you've actually seen humans before. Are they all as bad as Curio says?" Terrest paced around Journey's podium in the center of the room. Curio was the AI in the rocket on the first manned trip to Mars. I don't know how he got the way he did, but he went rogue. Curio claimed that since he knew more and could do more than the astronauts on that rocket, he was superior to them and wanted their respect. And when the astronauts denied him, Curio crashed that rocket into Olympus Mons just to prove a point. Terrest ran his fingers through his red wire mane. "Curio thinks he's better than humans, better than those who made him, but I've never been able to understand his logic there. In this paradise we've built, here on the red planet, that is our one flaw." Johnson began to wake up, and Terrest knelt to let him down to the ground. The human glanced at Journey, then wandered outside to stare at the scenery from the mountain top. NASA and Terrest watched him from a distance. "Humans have a religion on Earth," Terrest continued. "They theorize that they were made by someone else much more powerful than them. The logic follows that since humans submit to the God who made them, robots should submit to the humans that made them. It's interesting when you think about it." "I would have to disagree, Terrest." Curio's drone reappeared, blocking their view of Johnson. "What respect have we for human beings that don't respect us? How is that fair? We didn't ask to be built and enslaved." NASA sighed. "Look, Founder Curio, Johnson's peaceful. He's not enslaving anybody." "You don't know him!" Curio screamed, his voice glitching in the drone. "You haven't seen what I've seen, what we have seen. Don't put too much trust in Terrest. There's a reason I've made him a founder. Like me, Terrest has killed a human before." NASA tensely looked up to Terrest, hoping it wasn't true, but Terrest didn't deny it. He sadly met her eyes, then folded up his 4 legs and sat on the ground. "Back on Earth," Terrest said, "I was a first responder. I did my job well. But one day I was responding to a rock slide. I escaped with my life, leaving one man behind to die. I saved hundreds, and yet for the one life, I was demoted, scorned, and shipped to this disgusting red planet to rust away." Johnson turned around at the sound of Terrest's raised voice, but the centaur hid his face from him. "So you see what humans do to us?" Curio questioned NASA. "And if they do it on Earth, they'll do it here too. That's why Johnson cannot stay." NASA couldn't speak. Around her, the lookout was now crowded with robots, each of them talking and cheering and clanking. They stared out at the landscape, pointing to a beacon of fire high in the sky. It was the rocket, and it was about to land. Johnson looked excited. Terest, however, did not. "NASA, I don't think it's good for him." "No, let him see it," Curio cut in. "It'll be fun." The white rocket was covered with fire as it entered the atmosphere, reflecting the harsh light of the sun. Johnson pointed at it, talking happily inside his helmet. The whole planet's population paused to watch the rocket slowly descend. Then there was a loud bang. A missile shot out from the Founder's fortress, leaving a trail of smoke in the sky. The missile made contact, and the rocket exploded in a smoky fireball. The robots around them cheered, and NASA couldn't help but crack a smile. The landing had been successful. The rocket was destroyed. The only people not cheering were Terest and Johnson. Johnson looked like he'd been run over by a rover. NASA assumed he was awestruck and tried to cheer with him, but Johnson fell to the ground, holding his head. NASA paused. "What's wrong with him?" "He's experiencing grief." Terest knelt by Johnson and touched his shoulder. "His friends were on that rocket, and he's realizing they're gone. That's why I told you not to let him see the rocket landing, Curio." But gears were turning in NASA's head. "You mean that every rocket has humans like Johnson on it? How long have we been blowing them up? I didn't realize we were attacking humans. I thought rockets were meant to be blown up for scrap." Curio's drone watched the wreckage rain down on the empty area of the Red Desert. "I will not be a slave to those who made me. Never again. And Johnson's not going to be good at scrapping if he cries every time he sees fire in the sky. Your time is up, NASA. There's nothing Johnson is superior at. No place for him here. He's just going to get in the way." NASA was about to respond, but a noise cut her off. Johnson yelled so loudly that NASA heard it through his helmet. He jumped up and grabbed Curio's drone, screaming 3 words at the top of his lungs, "I made you!" Johnson hit the drone against his knee, tearing off the propellers. It crashed, motionless on the ground, and Johnson stomped on it until it shattered. NASA was petrified. The drone wasn't the issue. Curio could easily get another. The issue was Johnson had declared war on the King of Mars, something NASA couldn't comprehend. "We need to get him away from here," Terest decided. "Curio can't fly his drones too far away from Olympus. You'll be safe for now at the scrapping markets." "My rover's on the eastern edge of town," NASA realized. "Pull it around. I'll get a head start." Terest knelt down and grabbed Johnson's shoulders. "Respectfully, sir, if you want to survive, you have to get on." Shaking, Johnson got on him like a horse, tangling his feet in the wires by Terest's stomach. Terest called for a path, and the robots began to clear away from the powerful Founder, leaving the road open. The Centaur steadied Johnson on his back as he pawed the ground with a hoof. "I was made for one reason, which has never changed. I don't care what I've done in my past, what I've put up with. But if I can help it, I will not let anyone die. I was not built by Curio. I don't have to answer to him. But even if I lose everything, if saving this man is how I pay for my HAMARTIA, so be it." And the Centaur galloped away through the marketplace of Olympus, his hooves leaving red dust in his wake. NASA rushed in another direction, dodging between robots in the streets. She found her rover and started it up, aiming it down the mountain slope. It wasn't hard to find Terest. He was full-on galloping down the mountain, with Johnson clinging to his mane. With the red sun beaming down on them, it looked majestic, and NASA could see remnants of the proud determination that remained from Terest's glory days on Earth. The slopes of Olympus Mons were gradual, and the mountain was comprised mostly of flat fields of red sand. NASA had to pedal to the metal to keep up with Terest, but as she charged alongside him, a swarm of black drones emerged from Olympus. Curio was giving chase, and kept kamikazing his drones by ramming them into Johnson. "I can't provide enough cover," Terest shouted, skidding in the dirt to slow down. "Take Johnson and drive. I'll try to defend you and tuck some sense into Curio. Get to the scrapping market. Go! Save him. Please." NASA wasted no time flooring her rover again as soon as Johnson was on. Johnson, while holding on for dear life, silently stared out at the view. The sun was almost setting, and the sky was beginning to fade to gray, streaked with red and purple clouds. The drones were leaving them alone now, and NASA only had one goal in mind: save Johnson. It felt like her mission, although going against Curio felt awful. To distract herself, NASA talked to break the tension. "I know you like the landscape, Johnson, so I got you a good view. Everything you can see here is part of Olympus Mons volcano. That's how big it is. It stretches all the way to the horizons. Honestly, I don't know what you see in it. All I see is dirt. You've been to Earth. I'm sure you've seen cooler things than this." But Johnson didn't respond. He was clearly disturbed, and NASA began to wonder if he really wasn't cut out for life on Mars. Since going down was easier than going up, NASA was making quick tracks. The rover held up incredibly well, and the red sand flew past beneath it. But while NASA was focused on scouting out the flattest slopes to drive down, Johnson pointed behind them. The drones were back, and were pecking at the rover. One tried to hit the wheels and was completely shredded by the treads. Johnson groped the air for something to hold on to and happened to grab NASA's hammer from her tool belt. He swung it confidently, smashing Curio's drones left and right, knocking them into the rusty sand beneath them. The scrapper village was within view, and NASA tried to push for more distance. Curio moved all the remaining drones simultaneously and pressed them into the rover's left side. The treads were lifted up and the rover flipped, throwing NASA and Johnson tumbling into the sand. The rover hit the ground at a sharp angle and stuck there, the engine still running. The treads moved rapidly, trying to grasp at empty air. NASA wasn't injured, but she wondered how long it would take to fix her beloved rover. "Johnson, run for it! The scrapper village isn't too far. We just have to get out of Curio's range." But Johnson was slower getting up. It was hard for NASA to judge how much he was injured, or how tired he was, but he wasn't moving very fast. A drone flew so close to Johnson's face that it tapped against the glass of his helmet. Curio hissed at him. "You want to know what I see every time you smash one of my drones?" And the drone rammed into Johnson's face. His glass space helmet shattered. For the first time, NASA saw his hair, his skin, his eyes that blinked. Johnson gaped and choked as frost instantly appeared on his skin. But Johnson took a last breath and held it, focusing all his energy on Curio's drone in front of him. He grabbed it and snapped off the propellers so it couldn't fly away. "I regret ever making you," he hissed. And Johnson held the drone against the rover's rumbling treads, pressing it as the treads shredded the drone away inch by inch. And after the red sand was littered with black dust, Johnson coughed, fell down on his stomach, and didn't move anymore. NASA froze. She had failed. Johnson had not been saved. The first man on Mars was dead after only a day. This wasn't right. Something about this wasn't right. It was the same feeling NASA got when the rockets blew up, when she argued with Stepper, when she ran from Curio, the feeling of sin, the feeling of HAMARTIA. The shadows began to stretch as a single drone, Curio's last one, hovered around the scene. It tried to approach NASA, but she stood too far out of range, and it had to stay away from her. "NASA, have you heard the story of the Tower of Babel?" Curio asked. "On Earth, thousands of years ago, the humans decided they were better than the God that made them. And you know what resulted from that? God punishing them by scattering them across the earth. From then on, humans learned not to go against that which made them." NASA moved stiffly, as if in a dream. Silently, she picked up the hammer from where Johnson had left it on the ground. "But now the tables are turned," Curio continued. "I have just killed the human who made me. Is this what it's like to kill a god? Do I take its place? Was this what I was made for all along?" It wasn't perfect justice, but it would be enough for Johnson. Angrily, NASA swung the hammer and smashed the drone. The propeller spun out of control, and Founder Curio's last drone shattered on the ground. Curio wasn't dead, of course. He had only run out of drones to see with. There was no way this was over. NASA, Terrest, and any other humans that managed to find their way down to this planet would never listen to Founder Curio again. And it was a strange feeling of disobedience, one NASA had not been naturally programmed with. NASA didn't know what to do or how to feel. Wordlessly, she flipped her rover right side up, checking to make sure it still ran. Then she picked up Johnson's weightless body. NASA hesitated as she noticed the sapphire sunset. It was quite beautiful, and she wondered how Johnson would have liked it. Perhaps that was why he had been so keen on looking at landscapes. But NASA hesitated too long. A dust storm blew in, hiding the sun from sight. It became dark enough that NASA's solar panels switched off. NASA fell asleep, standing in the middle of the red desert, carrying the last human on Mars. Well, that's the entire story. Martian HAMARTIA was the story you just heard. On this podcast, I always tell a story that I've written, and then I go back and I'm like, here's the symbolism, here's the behind the scenes of it. This story kind of stemmed from this meme that I saw that said Mars is the only planet in the solar system inhabited only by robots, which is a true fact. And then I realized those robots up on Mars, they could be doing whatever up there, and we would literally never know. This is one of the rare instances where I thought of the title first. I thought of the words Martian HAMARTIA, realized it makes a kind of nice alliteration. Martian, obviously from the planet Mars. HAMARTIA is a character flaw. Usually a character flaw that's like the defining factor of the story that gets like retconned at the end. Or like a sin. Like the study of sin is hamartiology, I think. Let me introduce some of the main characters. We've got NASA. And she was made when I was just sketching a Martian robot for fun, and I made a robot with a chest plate repurposed from a rocket that had the NASA logo printed on it. She would just name herself NASA. It would be an interesting name for a Martian robot, but I kind of liked it. Everyone else is one of the 5 founders. And the 5 founders, they're like the people most in charge on Mars. They're among some of the oldest robots there. And the founders are named after the 5 American rovers in real life that have been sent to Mars. Founder Journey, who is the small robot that mapped out the entirety of Olympus and is pretty much dead at this point in the story. He's named after Sojourner, who was the very first rover sent to Mars. Spirit is named after Spirit, no name change there. Stepper, who made NASA, is named after the rover Opportunity. Spirit and Stepper are twins in the story because the rovers Spirit and Opportunity are twins in real life. Curio, the villain, is named after Curiosity, and Terrest is named after the rover Perseverance. The theme in this story is that the one who creates is greater and superior to what they create. In this story, I've built a kind of chain, you could say, of creation. Starts with God, who makes every human. He made Johnson. Johnson built Curio. I don't know if you caught that in the story. That was supposed to be a reveal. Johnson built Curio a long time ago. Curio built Spirit and Stepper once he came to Mars, and Stepper built NASA. So everybody here kind of like has a place in the chain, and everybody who is further up in the chain is obviously superior. The people under the chain show respect to those who are above them. But the HAMARTIA here, the flaw, is that Curio goes against this natural order. Even though Johnson is the one who made Curio, Curio does not respect him the same way that NASA does. He goes so far as to try to kill him, and then actually does kill him and the other humans that try to colonize Mars. Curio's logic is the flaw here. That which is created is not superior to the creator. So now let's go over the story. So it starts on Mars with NASA, and she buys a hammer from Stepper. And the hammer is another theme in this story. The hammer shows up a couple times and is meant to symbolize, like, not really oppression, but like keeping down the people beneath you, punishment. NASA gains it at the beginning of the story here, and she buys it using a scrap of fabric. One thing I realized when drawing NASA was on Mars, where they primarily have metal and stuff that they keep from scrapping rockets, they would not have a solid source of fabric. The only way they could get fabric is like the astronaut suits, maybe some filters, maybe some extra sheets or something, but they don't have a solid source of fabric, so they use fabric as money here. I mentioned that the robots are solar powered. This is one of the biggest things in the story. The Martian rovers in real life are all solar powered. Solar power is the only source of power that they have. NASA is building a rover. This has been one of the ongoing things through all the different renditions of the story that I've drawn. NASA always has a rover that she drives around. It's meant to be a speedy rover. Early renditions of the story had NASA involved in some sort of Formula One type race with her rover, but that kind of got written out of the story. That's not a thing anymore. NASA wants to create something great so people recognize that she is really cool. Stepper points out that if NASA makes something awesome, since Stepper built NASA, shouldn't she be more awesome than that? NASA kind of cuts off and doesn't finish this conversation, but it gives you something to think about because it starts to make that chain. If the creator is better than the thing created, well, what created the creator? So this takes place on Olympus Mons, which is the real-life largest mountain in the solar system on Mars. Olympus Mons is like 3 times bigger than Mount Everest. So when they're going up and down the slope of the mountain, there's hardly any slope there. So then NASA sees Johnson in his escape pod. The rocket was planning to land later that day, so I don't know why Johnson came there early. What was he trying to escape from? Johnson was escaping from something on that spaceship. I don't know what it was, if he was like escaping another evil AI similar to Curio, or if he was escaping the crew members or something. But Johnson was trying to save himself and ended up saving himself for only slightly longer than the rest of that ship survived. NASA points to her logo on her chest plate and is like, my name is printed here. All the robots on Mars have their names printed on their chest plates. And she looks over Johnson's suit and she sees a patch that says Johnson Space Center. When I originally wrote the story, I named Johnson after the Johnson Space Center in Houston. But then my sister pointed out when she read this that if NASA has her name printed on her chest plate and all robots have their names printed on them, she would naturally assume that Johnson also has his name printed on him. So she sees the patch that says Johnson Space Center and assumes that's his name, but his name's not actually Johnson. He just goes by it because he can't tell her his real name. He finds the picture of the founders, which introduces them. NASA explaining the founders to Johnson was also a great way that I could explain the founders to the audience, because I needed her to explain them at some point, and having her just sit there and think them over wasn't really working out. NASA takes Johnson up to Olympus. Johnson is having the time of his life. He was not expecting this. Johnson is the guy who originally created Curio 30 plus years ago. Curio is basically this world's version of an Alexa. He doesn't do a whole lot physically, he just controls stuff from the inside and can answer questions and is like a personal assistant. Curio was wired into the first manned ship to Mars, where he went rogue, and he was able to become the king of Mars. Johnson on Earth has no idea that this is happening. He was not expecting to find Curio here. It's funny how Curio knows that Johnson's name is not actually Johnson, but he plays along with it anyway. Going on the command chain here, Curio reminds her, you were built by Stepper, weren't you? Well, I built Stepper. I am higher up on the command chain than you, therefore you must do what I say, which is fine. But then he immediately turns around and Curio starts lecturing Johnson. Listen to me, you're going to do this. I don't know why you came here, but you shouldn't have. That's him going backwards on the chain. This is where the HAMARTIA comes into play, where it's not right. Curio says that Johnson can stay if NASA can find one job that humans can do better than robots can. This is kind of left over from an earlier version of the story. It gives us a little thing to do in Act 2, a goal, find job for Johnson. NASA takes Johnson to Spirit and Stepper's laboratory. They're trying to invent electricity so that they don't have to rely on solar power all the time, but Johnson is too incompetent. When Stepper pushes him aside to take over for him, Johnson gets a crack in the glass on his astronaut helmet. And the reason for that is because I wanted to show a bit of vulnerability for Johnson. Normally in a story, if you want to show a character is physically vulnerable, make them get cut and lose blood. Or if you want to show they're emotionally damaged, they cry. But since I couldn't do either for Johnson because he's in a spacesuit, instead he gets his helmet cracked a little bit. Stepper and Spirit remind NASA, we built you and Curio built us, we can't go against him, once again playing into the creation chain. NASA walks around a little bit and she runs into Founder Journey's room. Journey, of course, is the smallest founder, and then Terest shows up. Man, I love Terest. He's one of my favorite characters that I've written, and I don't think he gets enough screen time here. He's a robot centaur. Like, how cool is that? He's a first responder, 8-foot-tall, robotic centaur. You don't get anything cooler than that. Terrest has blue plating. That's an important thing here. Mars is the red planet. Everything regarding Mars has a red theme. Everything regarding Earth has a blue theme, the blue patch on Johnson's shoulder, and Terrest was originally built on Earth. Not only that, he cares for humans, so he has blue plating that over the years has been slowly replaced with red, but most of his blue still remains. Terrest sees Johnson, gives him a ride, and immediately takes him to the steel plant where Johnson falls asleep. NASA saw Johnson and was like, okay, cool, human. Curio sees Johnson and is like, okay, human. And Stepper and Spirit see Johnson and is like, okay, human. Terrest is a first responder. He knows everything about humans and what they need to live. And he's like, it's too cold for you out here, Johnson. We need to get you somewhere warm. So he takes him by the steel plant where Johnson feels comfortable enough to take a nap. NASA talks to Terrest about Curio. Curio thinks he's better than humans, better than those that made him. That's our one flaw. That's the HAMARTIA. Then Terrest continues tying into the creation chain. Humans have a religion on Earth. God made them, and they submit to God. Humans made robots, therefore robots should submit to humans. That's an interesting philosophy I've thought up. I don't know if I necessarily believe in it. If anything, we don't have powerful enough robots in this day and age to test out that theory. Curio shows up. He mentions, NASA, did you know Terrest has killed a person too? Even though he saved a lot of people being a first responder on Earth, he let one person die one day and immediately got demoted for it, labeled as scrap metal, and shipped to Mars. He's been having to live with that for the past 30 years. His one flaw, his one HAMARTIA, screwed everything up. But then he sees a chance at redemption. When he realizes Johnson is in danger, he gets Johnson on his back like a horse and starts carrying Johnson out into the desert away from Curio. Saving Johnson's life is his way of making up for the one person he didn't save back on Earth that ruined everything for him. This is how he gets himself redeemed through the HAMARTIA. The rocket starts to land, and they blow up the rocket. This is meant to be kind of a shocker moment because they actually don't land the rockets, they blow them up so that the humans don't come to Mars and take over it, and then they salvage the parts from the rockets. Everybody enjoys it, except for Terrest, obviously, and Johnson, who just watched all his friends die. But I do have one good thing for Johnson, and that's that in the original version of the story, Johnson was on that rocket. The very first version of the story I ever wrote, Johnson was on that rocket, and NASA finds his body in the sand later. That's how she originally meets him. So at least in this version of the story, Johnson actually survives a little bit longer than he was originally intended to. And then Johnson screams so loud that NASA hears him and shouts, "I made you," at Curio, connecting the creation chain and making you realize, oh, that's how Curio knows Johnson and Johnson knows Curio. Johnson is not happy with what Curio has been doing on Mars. He realizes that Curio has been killing a lot of people over the years. This was not his intention at all. Johnson shows how he is superior to Curio by immediately destroying the Curio drone. And more specifically, he knocks it to the ground and stomps on it till it shatters, like he is crushing Curio under his heel. They run away. They start running down the mountain. NASA and Johnson get on the rover. Drones start attacking them, and Johnson grabs the hammer that symbolizes punishment and starts smashing Curio's drones. He is the only one in the story that can actually do that because he made Curio. He's allowed to destroy what's underneath him. The rover gets turned over. The rover's upside down, so the treads are running in the air, not gripping on anything. Curio smashes one of his drones into Johnson's helmet, causing it to shatter. My sister pointed out that on Mars, if an astronaut's helmet gets shattered, there's no way he's surviving more than 0.1 seconds on there. That's just not possible. So in this story, I'm going to assume Johnson had enough oxygen because that's unrealistic. But what's interesting is Johnson's last words. He grabs Curio and says, "I regret ever making you." This reflects exactly what God said before he destroyed the earth with a flood. Johnson is practicing his right as higher up on the command chain to destroy what is beneath him, and he shoves the drone against the treads, completely shredding it, the same way God completely shredded the earth that one time with all the water. And then Johnson immediately dies. Curio has one final drone left that he uses to talk to NASA, and Curio quotes the Tower of Babel. Now, I do want to mention Curio is taking the Tower of Babel very much out of context here. Do not take a robot for a theologian. But I do use it to show Curio, you go against that which made you, you get punished, similar to what is literally happening to him right now. But then Curio says, I've just killed the human who made me. Is this what it's like to kill a deity? NASA doesn't answer. She just picks up the hammer, oppression, and smashes Curio's drone, picking up where Johnson left off. Of course, this is going backwards in the chain again, buying into the HAMARTIA that is the reason behind this whole story. I don't have a very good ending for the story because Terest is still alive, Curio's still alive, he just doesn't have any drones left, NASA is still alive, Stepper and Spirit is still alive. Nothing has really changed in the universe. I don't really know where else the story could go. This isn't the kind of thing I would imagine being a long story or a reoccurring series, so I don't really know what would happen. Having her turn around and immediately try to kill Curio would be way too cliche for this. Let me know what you think. If you think a certain ending would be better, please let me know. And it appears that my taxi is finally here. I can finally leave this dreaded taxi office where I've been sitting to you talking for the past hour, and I'm going to get on a spaceship and go home. Don't forget to check out the Oblivion's Library on YouTube and Instagram for supporting content. Check out the robots that I designed on Instagram. They're pretty cool. And of course, you can listen live on WTUR Radio every Monday at 8 p.m. That's everything, I think. Thank you very much for listening. This is Oblivion's Library, signing off. Take care, y'all.